There we go. Good
Good
morning,
morning.
everybody. Welcome to the Daily Whatever Show. I am Lawrence Winterman,
And I am Dana Dubois. Good morning, everyone. And especially hello to you, Lawrence.
and we
I've
are very
missed
on
you.
brand today.
I know. Lawrence, it's a new sweater.
Yeah, I like
Eh,
it. It is
Thank you.
definitely boobs.
Is it? Oh gosh, I guess Lawrence, that's just my body. It's not supposed to be.
Right. You're like,
But I
I have
noticed
boobs,
I
sir. Thank you
I,
very
I
much.
do, I do. And I feel a little bit like a linebacker because it's got kind of this puffed sleeve thing.
Yeah, it's a little I don't know, Sigourney Weaver in Working Girl circa 1989.
That is a deep cut, Lawrence.
I mean,
Yeah, it was a Black Friday purchase. Here you go, Kira. Yeah, Kira. You know what? Kira, I realized didn't come down at all when it was just me yesterday. She never
aw.
came. So
Well,
there she is getting her
she's
treat.
Winterman's dog. What can we say?
I know. I think I was quieter when you weren't here. I was just kind of talking in this
I don't
very
believe that
modulated
for a second.
tone. You could ask the audience. They were here and she never came downstairs. She slept through the whole show. Um Anyway, yeah, the sweater, I got a couple things from this website that Facebook has been putting in my feed for like a year that is basic, like it's sort of goth light, but like very, very on brand for me. Everything they show me, I'm like, I want that sweater, I want that dress. So this is the first thing. I probably would have ordered it a size smaller though. You just never know when you're buying online.
Yes, I like
But
goth light as a descriptor.
goth
That's
light,
very
yeah,
fine.
it's called, the website is called Disturbia. I
After the
don't.
movie or TV show or song, I don't.
Is
There
that
was
a
something pop
is that
culture
no?
called
I don't.
Disturbia recently.
Oh, I don't know what that is. But anyhow, I don't want to talk about my fashion choices this morning. I want to talk about you and how you're doing, if you're comfortable talking about it.
I'm great. I'm fine.
Okay, I believe you. You sound very sincere right now.
Yeah.
Oh, honey, I'm
Yeah. No.
sorry.
I mean,
I don't
shit
mean to laugh at
sucks.
you,
My
Lawrence.
mom
That
is
was
doing
just
great. So, thank you
good.
to everybody for the very kind thoughts and words. I passed those along to my mom. She's super grateful. Um, she's fine. She's in surprisingly good spirits.
Great.
She came through the surgery with flying colors. They removed a little bit more than they thought they were going to have to. But
Great.
that's good. Like it better out, right, than in.
Yeah.
She's recovering really well. She's in really good spirits. She went through a hip replacement and a knee replacement within the last couple of years. And so I think for her, she's sort of like weirdly delighted that the pain is not as bad for
Ah,
the lumpectomies as it was for those surgeries. So she's in a really good mood. I was over there for a while yesterday, and my sister and niece are both there, and she's in great spirits. Her color looked really good. She looked very perky and awake, and she's staying ahead of the pain. So for
she's
an
on
84
drugs.
year old lady who just had cancer surgery, she's doing pretty well, I gotta say. So yeah, she's really good. She's
Okay.
good. I'm a complete disaster.
Oh, honey.
I'm an emotional wreck. For having just broken up with boyfriend that I thought I was in love with. Womp womp.
Mm.
I am very sad and weird and mopey, but I'll be fine. I will apparently survive, as the song tells me. So
I have no doubt of that. And I'm sorry, Lawrence.
it's
It's too
it's
many
kind of a lot.
pillars. It's too many pillars rattling at the same time. And
And on top of that, over at Blue Amp, Melissa Corrigan broke some news over the weekend. So it
oh
was
my
it was
God.
basically like, massive unexpected breakup, giant launching of breaking news story. Mom goes in for surgery. I'm
Yeah.
feeling a little whiplashed and maybe just sort of, I don't know, jet lagged, spirit lagged. I think I
That's
have some kind of like spiritual or emotional jet lag and
we
hangover. So
is there if there isn't a term for that already, there should be. That feeling of
yeah,
like you don't know where you are in time and space because the grief is sort of dragging you in directions. I I uh I think we should coin a term for that.
yeah,
Spiritual jet lag might be it, but I feel like we could come up with something more
right.
clever.
Spirit lag. I don't know. Maybe it needs to be a little more descriptive than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just sorry that you're going through it, and lots of folks are joining us and are weighing in the chat saying that they love you and every.
Oh, well, thanks everybody.
I
I'm
know it's
I'm glad to
hard.
be back. Thanks
Yeah,
for letting me have the day off on Monday and then humoring me when I kind of needed to take an extra day yesterday. So
that was not a humor at all. Like, um, grief is real, and I know grief is real and varied, right? You're not you're not grieving your mom, but your grief is tied in all of that, and there's grief around losing your relationship, and
yeah,
that's exhausting. It maybe emotional whiplash is the right
yeah.
jet lag, whiplash. I don't know which metaphor works best, but you can always take time. It was weird being on air alone yesterday for the first time
I'm sure you
with
had a fabulous
the
time.
Daily Whatever show. Everyone was
Dana with a
amazing.
microphone all to herself.
Yes, it was all me all the time. Kira, I'm gonna give you one more. I've noticed, Lawrence, that this other new treat I got, not the usual nature nos, but the iPaw turkey tendon soup.
Oh, yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
getting paid to advertise for these, y'all, but I like to keep acting like I am. She goes through these faster, and she
More
wants
of
more of
them.
them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she knows I'll be like shh and hand them to her while I'm on air. But yeah, going on air yesterday with everyone, I felt very held, but also just very entertained. Like it was my memory of that hour is of a conversation, not of a monologue,
Oh, that's amazing. That's what we
because
love about this show.
it truly. Oh, good morning. Speak of the journalist devil, Melissa Corrigan. Hi.
Right. Speaking of breaking news journalist
Yes, we were
Melissa
just talking
Corrigan,
about you.
here she is.
Mm-hmm.
And we're yes, Melissa, we've already talked about the sweater and how lovely it is.
Thank
We should
you.
really mention our guest today. We are super excited. Is
Yes,
Arturo Dominguez, who's a first-time guest on the show for us,
he
and
is.
we're talking about Latin American issues. We are incredibly excited to have him here. It's a real honor that he would spend
Yes.
some time with us.
And
So,
his
how about rather than whinging on about my boring issues, why don't we bring Arturo onto the show?
I think
Oh,
we
whoops.
should.
It's only one button click, Arturo. How are you? Oh,
Oh,
oops,
no
we can't hear
sound.
you. You're muted.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you guys. Good
Oh,
Welcome.
morning.
it is great to have you, Arturo. I meant to read your bio before you came on air, but it's kind of short and sweet. Independent journalist, putting human rights first. You are covering politics, immigration, Cuba, Latin America, and then you've got a whole bunch of places where you've been published on here. It is an honor to have you here to talk about this topic, especially timely right now at this moment in
Very
this
much.
awful political timeline that we're living in. Um, and welcome.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. I've been looking forward to this, all week. So yeah, this is
Great.
going
Awesome.
to be this should be a good one.
I hope so. Would you like to introduce yourself beyond your bio to the folks in the audience today?
Yeah, I'm Arturo Dominguez, independent journalist. I've worked for various outlets in the past, mostly Latino focused. Futuro Media, Latino Rebels, a lot of that stuff. Recently, in this last year or two, I've been getting published overseas. So I've had a few
Okay.
articles published in Venezuela, in Cuba, and Honduras recently. So yeah, just kind of getting around, trying to build a platform, trying to talk to people around the world, basically, mostly in Latin America because I'm Cuban. So kind of have that little bias about focusing on Latin America because that's kind of important to me.
Yeah,
Of
for
course.
sure.
Lawrence and I grew up in South Florida. So we
Mm,
were geographically very close, though we were worlds apart. Cuba was
right.
this, growing up when we did, was this exotic, untouchable place that was like right there. You couldn't
Right.
Yeah,
see it, but
right.
Right. We knew it
um,
was right there, but we also, there was a kind of a forbiddenness to it, and also, a like frisson of uh danger, because
Right.
the stories told about Cuba, about Castro, about the revolution, as we were growing up, and especially with the sizable Cuban population in Miami, there was a lot of kind of danger and exoticism to the island
Right.
nation just to our south.
Right. And it's wild because a lot of the narratives about Cuba just aren't, accurate, right?
Right.
So, there's a lot of I'm not like a big Castro fan or anything like that, but that's the one thing I try to explain to people. Like, I don't have to like the leaders anywhere else in the world because they're not my problem. I don't have to deal with them, right? So,
Right.
if the Cuban people want to be communist, let them be communist,
Yeah.
and I have a lot of family that still live there, mostly Afro-Cuban family. A lot of people don't realize that Cuba is a majority Black island,
mm,
something like 62%. And, it makes sense. It was a former slave colony. Put two and two together.
Yeah.
And, there's a reason why a lot of the Cubans in Miami are white. It's because of the white flight after Castro took over. He desegregated the island. Um, you know, Black Cubans and indigenous Cubans, and even, believe it or not, Chinese Cubans were all relegated to, the outskirts of society, to the fringes of society. It was heavily segregated. You didn't hardly see a lot of Afro Cubans in like the big cities like Havana, and you do now. So, there's a
Jerome,
lot of issues.
this is why we have these conversations, because
I,
you literally
Right,
just blew my mind and
it's,
taught me something
right.
in the first
I,
2 minutes we had
I
you
had
on the
no
show.
idea.
Growing up in South Florida with the sizable Cuban, I had literally no concept that it was a racial thing. None. You
Yeah.
literally just blew my mind, man.
Yeah, and there was a lot of it was driven by fear. I call it the white flight out of Cuba. It was driven by fear because, a lot of people feared retribution from, the Black Cubans and stuff like that. My family, the white side of my family, came to Cuba from Portugal in the late 1800s to work in the fields because there was no work in Spain or Portugal or anything
Mm,
like that. So that's another reason why my family is largely Afro-Cuban. We worked side by side with, all the field workers, and um, a lot of our history, Cuban history, is surrounded around, our Yoruban culture from Africa. And like in Cuba, it's so much different than the United States because they embrace their African history. They talk about it. They talk about all the atrocities. They talk about the importance of coming together and getting past all that kind of stuff. In the United States, we like, we don't want to talk about that. It's ugly. It's painful. Yeah, it's all those things. But, you have to work through them. And, we're like, we didn't get to pick who we are, right? So, like,
right.
I was born to Cuban immigrants, right, that came to the US. They were there for Batista's dictatorship. They were there after Castro took over. And, you know, you talk to a lot of people that are my parents' age, like my father's 91, and he'll tell you that when Castro initially took over, it did seem like things were improving because they got rid of a dictatorship.
Right.
But it wasn't until, the crippling sanctions and things started becoming tough that a lot of Cubans decided to leave, after the white flight. And that's where you had the Mariel boat lifts and all that stuff in the 70s and 80s.
That's what we
Um,
grew up with.
Yep.
The boats
right,
coming over.
Yeah, that
Yep.
was absolutely
right.
like the news in South Florida as we were coming up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of anti-Cuban rhetoric back then
Oh yeah.
too.
There
And
was.
Cubans today don't realize how hated they were in Miami just 3 decades ago or four decades ago,
Yeah.
and it's pretty
Hmm.
ugly. Um, and it blows me away to see some people, some even in my family, that kind of are MAGA, and they just fall for the whole thing. And I know we're supposed to be talking about Latin America, but I always try to explain to people that for the children of immigrants, like our parents came here, didn't understand the racism and the politics of this country. So we didn't have that foundation of education of like, this is racist, that's racist. And a lot of Latinos fall into this white supremacist rhetoric stuff. For me, it was different. I grew up in Union City, New Jersey, super diverse community, a
Hmm.
block from the projects. Like I was around all these different cultures and people and races, and it was just, fun to be around. And then moved to Texas, where it's really
Oh
white,
God.
was a bit of a culture shock in my
Oh
late
yeah.
teens. But yeah, it's Latin America is not. It's not how it's portrayed here in the U.S. It's so much more complex. It really is.
You're blowing my mind in so many ways, and one of them is, and one of the questions I was going to ask is why, how can how can Latina folks vote for Trump? Like how is MAGA made? Sorry, how does MAGA have such a foothold? And you've just explained it. It's rooted in racism,
A lot of it is,
at least
yes.
with the
A lot
Cuban
of it is.
population. And as I was preparing for this interview, getting ready this morning, I was going back and playing some of your news stories, some of your older ones, and what really struck me. And Lawrence, check me here, because we've known each other for over 40 years. We didn't
Oh,
study
wow.
anything related to Latin American history in school, did we? Like,
No,
I mean, I don't even think we studied world history. I think a little. We got a
no,
little
we
world history,
we did
but
study
like
world history,
it was
but
all European. It
Latin
wasn't.
American history was a paragraph, maybe, right? It was like the Spanish conquest, and and
Yeah.
then I don't know, suddenly flash forward to modern day, and the United
Right.
States and the Monroe Doctrine, which Arturo, I know you recently wrote really eloquently about. I really, Arturo, I can't tell you how much you have just changed my world in this moment. Seriously, when we were growing up, and the conversation around Cuba and Cubans and the Mariel boat lift, and the mass migration into Miami. We were in Broward County, which, as folks may know, is the county just north of Miami-Dade County, and it was a very white county, and the conversation was about like keeping those people in Miami-Dade, right? And there was absolutely no nuance, no curiosity, no intelligence to the conversation. It was pure racism on that front, and absolutely no indication that what was happening was the white flight that you're talking about. Like, I, sorry, I don't, I'm not trying to make the conversation about me, but also like this is just another indication. I can't believe I'm 55 years old. Try to be curious about this world, and anti-racist and anti-colonial, and I'm still finding things embedded in our culture that, how would I know this without talking to you and having you illuminate this to me? Like, I mean, I guess I need to do more reading, right? It's not your obligation to teach me the things that I should know, but my fucking God, I am so angry right now that I didn't know this piece of very relevant history.
I mean, I'll disagree with you on it not being my obligation. I feel like it's an obligation to my people, especially to our deep, like Yoruban history that is part of the slave trade, that is part of, slavery in Cuba. Cuba was one of the last, if not the last countries to abolish slavery. And, that was surrounded by power. And, Cuba's only really had maybe three presidents that were legitimately elected in its history.
Yeah,
Every other election was either interfered with by Spain or by the United States. And, when you guys touch on the history, I was taught that history too. We talk about the Spanish American War and liberated Cuba, and then that's it, right? You talk about like the War of 1812. It's a blurb in our education.
yeah,
Um, the thing is like when my grandmother finally decided to leave Cuba only because she wanted to spend the last years of her life around her grandkids and great grandkids here, who she had never met at the time. And we were lucky to have her for like 12 years. But my grandmother was a revolutionary. A lot of people in my family will tell you
Ooh.
that don't want to talk about this, but she was a revolutionary. She stayed in Cuba. You know, she was there for her people. She was there for her community. She was there for all of our extended family. But when she came here, she opened my eyes to so many things, not just the food and the culture, but the history. And she was so in touch with that part of our history, which, you know, my grandfather on my mother's side was one of those from the great white flight out of Cuba in 59 and 60. And he was extremely racist. And
Mm.
he turned his back on the Afro-Cuban side of our family. So, and he was up in New Jersey. So around him, I didn't really get to hear any of that, right? You know, I would never understood how he could be so racist in such a diverse community with so many black people and so many Argentinians and Colombians and Cubans in Union City. Never understood that. But after talking to my grandmother, uh, the history became so clear. And when she was talking about staying there for our extended family, that's who she was staying with. It was all the Afro Cubans who didn't have an opportunity to flee Cuba. And most of them didn't. They just, you know, they got access to parks and they got access to housing and healthcare and things they didn't have before.
Yeah.
So why would you leave? All of a sudden you feel free, right? Even if it's Castro.
Right.
You feel free. So, you know, my family were on the fringes of society under Batista, and then they weren't. So, you know, my mom worked on Castro's literacy program where they went to rural areas and teaching people how to read. And that's why, you know, they basically eliminated illiteracy in Cuba. And she did that till she was like 16, 17 years old. She didn't come to the US till she was like 20. And, you know, all her friends were coming. So it was like a thing to do, kind of. So, you know, and that's what she did. And, you know, shortly after, here we come, um, ruining her life. But she was a single mom, man. So, you know, we gave her hell. It was three boys. There was three boys. So, yeah, we were
Oh my
troublemaker,
gosh.
inner city in the 80s. You know, we were in trouble. I mean, it's hard not to be. But
Where
yeah,
were
you
you in the
know,
birth order, Arturo? Are you the
in the
oldest?
middle. I'm
You're
in
right
the
in the
middle.
middle.
Uh-oh, the
Okay.
Right in the
middle.
middle.
The
Middle
peacemaker.
child.
This
Yeah,
explains
yeah.
a lot. You're the explainer, the peacemaker.
Right, right, right.
Isn't that the tradition of the middle child?
Yeah. So, you know, after learning from my grandma about all this propaganda and stuff, and, you know, it's a two-way street. Right? Propaganda from Cuba is like propaganda from the US. So you have to like filter through a lot of it to find the actual truth. But like it really opened my eyes to like the US's side of what's going on in Cuba. I always knew there was sanctions and everybody called it a blockade and an embargo, and I always thought I was hyperbolic, but it's not. It's absolutely an embargo, and it's a blockade in a sense where, you know, Cuba's being cut off from financial markets. They have no access to loans, you know, and that limits their development. So when you see the power grid failing in places like Cuba, and Cuba can't buy anything that has more than 2 or 3% US parts in it, now you know why the grid fails. Because if something has a Siemens switch in it, for example, they can't use it. So they rely on donations from other countries, like Japan donates buses for their you know, mass transit system. China sometimes donates parts for the electrical grid, and they do the donation thing because Cuba has a barter system, and that's the only way they can skirt these sanctions.
Mm.
If there was a financial transaction involved in buying stuff from other countries or US corporations, then the sanctions are coming, you know, against those countries or corporations. So they do, you know, there's a barter system. You know, they bartered with Mexico when Mexico was building the Maya train that went from northern Mexico to southern Mexico. And they traded oil for aggregate material because Mexico needed the aggregate for the concrete. With Venezuela, same thing. You know, they trade oil for other resources. You know, could be aggregate material, could be rice, and that's kind of the only way Cuba gets anything is through this barter system that they have established in the Caribbean and, with some BRICS nations and stuff like that.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to say thank you. I I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you kind of see your mission as educating, right? I know
Yeah.
that can be really emotionally burdensome, and Dr. Mary M. Marshall further up in the chat kind of reminded me that maybe what I should be saying to you in this moment is thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Marshall, I've known Dr. Marshall a long time. Um, and, she's one of those elder Black voices with very deep knowledge in history. And man, when I talk to her, I just listen. I
Yeah,
try to absorb everything from Dr. Marshall. Yeah, I hold her very dear to my heart. I really do. Thank you
yeah,
to
Yeah.
Dr. Marshall. Yeah,
yeah. Thank you, Dr.
she's
Marshall.
good
You have a
people.
new subscriber. I
I
just
just
subscribed.
subscribed. Yeah. That's all
Yeah,
you
yeah,
need.
she's good people.
Yeah,
Wow. Well, I, I'm going to call you. We may try to get you on the show, Dr. Marshall. We'll see what we can do. It definitely sounds like another voice we'd love to hear from. Um, this is fascinating background. I love this. One of the things I love about the show is getting to bring people who have written amazing things on Substack on to hear face to face
Mm,
their viewpoints. We haven't even gotten into your articles yet, though. This is just such fascinating background. I love this space to just have a conversation and see where it's going to go.
Yeah, I
Shall
think
we?
it helps for people to understand where I'm coming from, right?
hmm,
So
Absolutely.
a lot of people say I'm biased, and I guess you can say I am because of my
Yeah.
history and stuff. So yeah,
I mean, aren't we all like?
right, right,
It's not a bias, it's a point of view.
right.
We all
right.
have our
There you
way
go.
in which we move through the world, and this
Hmm.
is your family of origin story always has a huge impact on it, and yours is fascinating, and it's at odds with so much of what we've been taught about Cuba.
Yeah.
Lawrence, this in a weird way is reminding me of, I mean, it's completely different from Palestine. It's the same in that growing up Jewish in South Florida, like the Palestinians were bad and the Cubans were bad.
Right, right,
That was sort of all of what I knew. That, like you said, Lawrence, there was no nuance. There
right.
was
There,
no
yeah, it
teaching of
was
the
just a super
history.
simple, like, Cubans bad, Palestinians bad, Israel good, United States good.
Yeah,
And even, like I read Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States. I've tried to explore and learn, and still there's so much nuance, and so much. um Maybe this is a good segue, Arturo, into your article, your article from a couple days ago about like the Monroe Doctrine and how that kind of got revised under TR Roosevelt, and how that got is now being sort of, I don't know, expanded or redefined as like a Trump doctrine in under our current regime. Do you want to kind of give people the sort of overview of that point of view?
Yeah. So the Monroe Doctrine's 1823 initially was to try to bring about the downfall of the Spanish Empire in Latin America. It led to a lot of these Spanish American War and all this stuff. And then in 1904, and the initial Monroe Doctrine was essentially to get European nations out of Latin America, bar them from colonization and imperialist stuff, and it essentially exerted dominion, like the United States' dominion over Latin America. So, if there's there's these caveats in it that are like, if there's corruption or, all these things, that we're allowed to intervene. And that just opened the door for the US to like invent narratives, convince the public, go to war. And it's very easy to do when, like the conversation we've been having, when people don't understand the nuances of what's really happening in Latin America. You're just getting US version of it. So then in 1904, 1905, I believe it was, Roosevelt, and both of these, the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary, I need to say this because these were announced through congressional speeches, right? They were announced to the nation in a very broad way. And then, policy was put together, and there was actual effort to exert dominion over Latin America, push the European nations out. In 1904 and 1905, it was a situation where some European nations were trying to collect on their debts in Latin America, and you had the British, the Italian, and the Germans that blockaded Venezuela at the time. They were going to try to collect their debt by force, and the U.S. wasn't having that. Under Roosevelt, they were worried about our waning influence in Latin America. Same thing that's happening now. So the Roosevelt corollary essentially was telling that European nations that they can't aggressively seek retribution for their debts. And again, emphasized and re-emphasized a little more control over Latin America along the lines of, anytime we see something we don't like, essentially we can stick our foot in there. And then, we come here now a couple hundred years later after the Monroe Doctrine, and Marco Rubio and several others in the White House have hinted towards a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Earlier, before the Monroe Doctrine was written, or the Trump corollary was written, the New York Times referred to it as the Don Roe Doctrine. I laughed at that, but I was like, please don't name it that.
God, right?
Anyway, so Trump's corollary is nothing like the other two. It's not a congressional speech. He didn't announce it to the nation. It's a 350-word blurb on a website, so.
Right.
I gasped when I got to that part of the story of at least it wasn't on Truth Social.
Right. Well, some of the stuff he said on. Right. Some of the stuff he said on Truth Social, it's kind of falls in line with that little corollary of his.
It really does.
Right. And his corollary, because it's just so short and broad, there's no real specifics over it. And you can take it any way you want. But I always try to look at these things as how can they use this in a negative way? And when you look at how broad it is, I mean, it's doing what he's doing right now. They're inventing narratives, right, about a country that's not a major drug smuggling country, Venezuela, and they're using that narrative to kill innocent people in the Caribbean, to try to start a war, and this is all part of that. And meanwhile, he's not only released the one of the most notorious drug cartel leaders in Latin American history, the former Honduran president.
Yeah.
He releases him, right? And then Marco Rubio goes to Ecuador and works out, economic trade deals and all these things with Ecuador, and Ecuador's president Noboa, who has a monopoly over bananas out of Ecuador, almost a monopoly on the shipping industry out of Ecuador, is allegedly tied. I'm going to say allegedly tied to drug smuggling operations that are pumping cocaine into Europe. If you have a monopoly on bananas and you have a monopoly in shipping out of your country, and your shipments are constantly getting caught with cocaine in them, it's not really difficult to make the connection there.
Right. The math is not particularly hard.
Right. And then, his ties to the Albanian mafia, and there's all these things that, Trump is working deals with, known drug smugglers, letting them out of prison, and trying to start a war on the false, on the pretext of, this is about drugs. And I mean, when it comes to Venezuela, at the end of the day, if Maduro was that bad, and I don't even like this guy, right? I really have issues with Maduro, but if he was that bad, why are you still inventing narratives about him?
Right.
If you can't justify action without inventing these things, I mean, we're back to Iraq, right? And WMDs and all this stuff. The difference now is it's between Iraq and Venezuela is it's a lot more public, right? We have social media, we have the internet, and most people are against, even MAGA are mostly against going into war with Venezuela. So yeah, it's the whole Monroe Doctrine thing that's kind of why Latin America stays destabilized. We, involve ourselves in elections. We coup democratically elected leaders that we don't like, that are leftist, that want to take their resources and make sure it benefits their people instead of benefiting some corporate interests in the US, that becomes a hindrance to greed and profit and all these other things. And, Latin America is in the situation that it is because of the United States. Migration patterns, like when it's not hard to put two and two together here either. When Trump went on these hardline policies against Cuba and Venezuela during his first term, this is where those mass migration events really started to get out of control.
You had a
And
great, I'm going to get
drawing
your article about this and post a link in the chat for those in the
right,
live
because
chat.
the
This
the
was a great
connection,
article too.
yeah, the connection between these heavy sanctions and mass migration out of countries is obvious. There's been, I think, several studies in the last year, 2 years, that have been pointing to this, because Venezuela was just such an eye opener for international organizations everywhere, because there was migration out of Venezuela after Chavez took over. All the wealthy people left. They feared, having being taxed into oblivion. And then, by the time Maduro took over, you're looking at just under or a little over a million Venezuelans leave. Then Trump tries the coup to install Juan Guaido. It failed. Heavy sanctions come, and all of a sudden, you're looking at, it was a million and a half in the 10 years since Chavez took over. Now you're looking at a million and a million and a half per year. So, that through line was just so obvious. And, during COVID, the US blocked Venezuela and Cuba from receiving vaccines and medical
Did
equipment. They wouldn't
we?
lift right.
How
Yeah,
did I
no,
not know about that?
yeah,
Uh,
they didn't lift any sanctions that would allow medical equipment in. They didn't to, uh, give them the freezers like we had for bodies. It was a terrible situation in both countries, and the U.S. refused to help. And who comes through? Mexico. So a lot of people don't see these parts. And unless I'm glad I'm bilingual, because I can watch news in Latin America without having to really struggle with it. And yeah, the fact that Mexico came through for both countries uh really, like, says a lot about Mexico. They've always been there for Cuba. Doesn't matter which president it was. The Mexican people have always been there for Cuba, and, like, Cubans on the island respect that. And there's, like, this connection between Mexico and Cuba because of that. But yeah, just to see a country that's supposedly third world, that's so much quote unquote poorer than us, come through
yeah.
for Latin American countries that are struggling, really says a lot. It really does. It says a lot of bad about us as a country, that we don't. It just blows me away sometimes.
It does. I have 2 points. First question from the audience. My first question is, what news sources would you recommend for non-bilingual folks that are telling
Uh,
it like it is, if we want to keep up with these topics without the bias of like the mainstream news here?
well, there are some that do their news in English and Spanish. Telesur, Telesur. They have an English version, and with Telesur, I always tell people to, when they do have a bias, kind of a pro Maduro thing, but as far as their news goes, it's accurate. Uh,
Mhm.
Venezuela, if you're interested in Venezuelan news, Venezuela Analysis um,
Okay.
is a good site. They do their stuff in English. A lot of really good deep insight there. If you look up on the U.S. side about Venezuela analysis bias, it's funny because they talk about how they're left wing bias, blah blah blah. But then you go way to the bottom of the page to see how many articles of theirs have been, you know, fake news. Zero.
Mhm.
Like, all their articles are legit. So you call it what you want. Um, El País, they do
Ah,
English. They
yeah,
do English and Spanish.
they do.
But they are a little U.S. centered, U.S. biased, but they do pretty good reporting. Um, but yeah, I
I
think
have one
Telesur is
question.
probably one of the best. They are
Tell us
government
sword.
funded, but they're funded by multiple governments in Latin America. So
Oh,
it's kind
that's
of like a
interesting.
right. They're not controlled by any government, but like Mexico, I think Brazil, Venezuela, several
Okay.
countries contribute to Telesur.
So it's like an
Um,
NPR.
kind of like that, yeah, right,
Black.
yeah.
I love
So
that.
yeah, Telesur, I like Telesur because you can get a lot of, they do a lot of exclusive interviews with world leaders and stuff. They did one recently with Rixi Moncada, who's a candidate in the Honduran election. And, she talked about a lot of the issues with that election, U.S. interference. And yeah, it's kind of an eye opener when you see hearing. So we saw the election interference in Honduras, right? It was obvious with subcommittee hearings, Trump on, Truth Social trying to influence the election and things like that.
Yeah.
But then when you hear from people who are actually in Honduras and their perspective of what this interference is like, it's an eye opener because they see it too and they are very against it. They do not like the US getting involved in their business. And that's pretty much the same for every Latin American country. And
Well,
right now
because we've
for Venezuela, it's, the United States has done nothing but unite the country around Maduro. And, you have a country again, these are other things people don't ever think about, but Venezuela takes a lot of pride in its independence in
yeah,
the
Hmm.
Bolivarian Revolution, where Simon Bolivar liberated like 8 countries from Spanish control.
yeah,
Venezuela's been independent for 218 years or so. They just celebrated their Independence Day. They celebrate their Independence Day like we do.
yeah,
They're very nationalist about it, just like we are. Um, and they're not interested in U.S. intervention in their country. They don't. They like their independence. They want to maintain their independence, and they're not interested in imperialist, colonialist, motivations. And because of that, because you have an imperialist country pushing on them, you're uniting them against us. And part of it is the sanctions. How do you expect to get people on your side if you're starving them? Cubans are not going to get on your side if you're starving them. Venezuelans aren't either. I mean,
yeah.
let's use
Hmm.
basic logic here.
That.
You
Yeah.
said something earlier when you were talking about Cuba that triggered a whole kind of thought chain for me. You were talking about how your grandmother and the folks who were left, the folks of black and Chinese and non-white ethnicities in Cuba, part of the reason they stayed is because they felt free, right? That like there was a kind of liberation
Right.
in that existed there. And what it made me think, perversely, what it made me think is that part of the reason, I think a lot of us in America are kind of like, how can MAGA stick with Trump for so long? Like, how is it every moment he reveals himself to be like the most narcissistic, misogynistic, rapey asshole in the world? It's because he makes them feel free. Because in
Right.
being it, like,
Hmm.
it's the opposite, right? It's the opposite of the scenario you were talking about, with Cuba. He has liberated these racist assholes who have been
Yeah.
here in hiding, who did not feel free under Obama and,
Right.
kind of the more liberal mindset. Trump has made them feel free. And so that's why they will stick with him through anything. It's because he's given them a kind of hateful liberation, right? A liberation
Right.
to be evil. And,
Yeah.
oh God, it just,
That's a good point. I mean, the thing about like with the reason why my reporting is so broad, right? It's basically Latino focused, and immigration is a huge issue, important issue for me and my family. A lot of big immigrant family all over the place. Um, and like you start to see the connections between like Latin America and what happens here all the time. You start to see the connections between our foreign policy and how we treat non-white people here. For example, the Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiments that have been really prevalent since 9/11 are part of the motivating factors behind our foreign policy in the Middle East, particularly what's going on in Gaza. You know,
Hmm.
we have more respect for the the white Jewish population than we do the brown Palestinian population,
Right.
which many of which are also Jews and Christians and Catholics, and but we don't care about that diversity because they're brown. You see those connections everywhere. There's one of the main reasons I'm so deep into Palestine, for example, is because Cuba is so deep in Palestine. There's a huge connection there. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of Palestinian doctors get their education in Cuba for free.
Mm.
Um,
Really?
yeah, there's probably 200 there now, Palestinians in Cuba getting their education there.
I had
Um,
no
and
idea.
yeah, and when you look at like our history too, one of the things I take pride in is the thousands of Cubans that, fought in Angola against apartheid. Another thing you never hear about in the United States.
Right.
So, from the 70s into the 90s, 500,000 Cubans fought in Angola. Tens of thousands of us died there to liberate Angola from apartheid. And, we won. We liberated Angola from apartheid. And that's a huge point of pride for us in Cuba, and for a lot of Cubans. And
Gosh,
you don't hear
Arturo,
you don't hear about it here.
it's almost like there's a giant international racist imperialist cabal trying to control the world, and
Almost,
and the people that
almost.
we've been taught to hate in this country are actually the ones fighting against it.
Yeah, I talk to people in Europe and stuff in Spain, and they all know all this history about Cuba. It's taught, because and particularly in Spain, there's direct connections there. But I hear from a lot of people in Europe, particularly, and in obviously Africa, but they'll be like, they're amazed at how little the United people in the United States know about a country that's just 90 miles away.
Yeah.
About
Yeah,
how
like
little we know about
Yeah,
Latin America, our neighbors. Referring to Latin America as our backyard, that's just a slap in the face to 800 million people who live in Latin America. So
yeah,
where they're not the backyard. If
right.
anything, the U.S. is in Latin America's front yard because there's way more people in Latin
right.
America.
Yeah,
So
honestly, I never understood that because when I look at a map, I think Canada's clearly our back.
are you going to get it
Kidding.
from Canadians?
Yeah, yeah. No, I know.
Robin,
They'll
are
be
you
nice
here
about it.
today? I don't know if we have a few Canadian regulars, Courtney and Robin. I haven't
Yeah.
seen their names go by today, but um, we love you. Don't be upset.
Right.
We have a question in the chat from Elizabeth Silic LaRue, who is an American living in Mexico.
Yeah.
And she asks, have you heard about any potential collaborations among LATAM leaders to resist the clearly stated colonial domination the Trump regime is planning?
Yeah. I can't say that there's any kind of like a formal agreement, but when you look at like the Organization of American States, not a very reputable organization, but when they excluded Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba from this year's meetings, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, several other countries boycotted the event, are going to boycott it. When they did it under Biden for it was in LA. It was the meeting of the Americas. I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now. They also excluded Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua from those events in LA. The Summit of the Americas is it what it
Mhm.
was, and AMLO boycotted it. Lula boycotted it in Brazil. Several leaders. It was quite a few, 6 or 7 world leaders. About a third or so from Latin America refused to go, and they instead sent like low-level dignitaries that really had no power. Same thing with the Organization of the American States. So there is pushback from various countries. I can't say that it's a concerted effort, and there's geopolitical implications there because the last thing you want to do is give the impression that there's some sort of coalition against the United States. So I think that in Latin America, the rhetoric is carefully thought out. Um, and Latin Americans don't hate Americans, U.S. citizens, right? Cubans love us. Cuban government wants to work with us, whatever. But anytime they speak out against the U.S., they are intentional about talking about the government or a specific leader that said a certain thing. Um, so I think that it's intentional and strategic how they discuss issues between their countries and the United States because of that. They don't want to see themselves as some sort of anti-U.S. coalition. So yeah, there's not agreed upon things, but I think you can see the pattern with a lot of leaders, like when Jamaicans went after Marco Rubio for calling them human traffickers because they welcomed Cuban doctors into Jamaica to help in the rural areas.
Hmm.
uh, the Jamaican president stood right next to Marco Rubio and just dragged him through the mud. And you love stuff like that. And in Latin America, they applaud that stuff.
Yeah.
They want to see Nobody likes Marco Rubio in Latin America. Let me just clarify that. So when you drag Marco Rubio through the mud, everybody's So
Oh my
so
gosh, I
yeah,
would love to hear more about that. I mean, I can imagine why they are not a fan, but I see Marco Rubio as someone who like almost had a hope of redemption in
Right.
his narrative arc not too long ago, who took the very wrong path.
yeah. I think Marco Rubio, for the most part, if he wants to talk trash about Cuba, Cubans will be pissed about it, right? But when he starts inserting himself in other countries' business, they're like, dude, who's this Cuban guy telling us how we need to do our stuff? Like, you worry about Cuba, you leave us alone. Like, we don't want nothing to do with you. And they're that way with Maria Elvira Salazar, who's always in Latin America's business. She's congresswoman from the Miami area,
Right.
Yeah.
and they were like, "Who's this lady? Like, shut up. We don't want to hear from you. Like, stay out of our business." It's kind of funny sometimes.
Well, let me. So I'm super curious on your perspective on Claudia Scheinbaum. Like as an American who has kind of followed but loosely kind of her career and her impact on Mexico. I'm curious what your perspective is. Like to me, she seems like she's a transformational leader. Is that the perception inside Mexico and kind of in the broader Latin American community?
Yeah, it's interesting you use transformational because right now they're in what between AMLO and her, right now they're in their fourth transformational period. This is the fourth transformation for Mexico, and the transformation is focusing on people, on the population, taking care of the population. So Mexico has nationalized a lot of things. Their oil sector, and they paid cash money for it. AMLO paid market value for oil refineries, bought them out from companies. He didn't just take it. And it's benefiting Mexico in a lot of ways. A lot of people criticize her because of her approach to dealing with the cartels. They criticized AMLO because he had a similar approach. And the idea behind their approach is instead of having this civil war type of scenario that we've had for decades, why don't we try to create a society that's more appealing to young people to become a functioning member of society instead of the easy road of becoming a gang member?
Yeah.
And that's working. It's hard to like argue against that when violent crime has gone down, femicides have gone down. There's still a lot of cartel activity, yeah, and the U.S. military or the Mexican military is still directly confronting them, but they're doing it in a more targeted way. They're doing it with help from the United States and our surveillance capabilities, with drone type stuff. Um, and it seems to be pretty successful. The issue with cartels is the same thing they've told us with terrorists. Once you take out a leader, they splinter and you go from one little terrorist cell to 10 smaller terrorist cells. And that's what happens with cartels. And then, there's war over who gets to control certain trafficking routes. And, it gets muddy really fast. And if you're doing it the way like Vicente Fox did it, where you're just having these all out war type scenarios on heavily populated city streets and civilians are getting killed and getting caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
It's not a sustainable approach. And it doesn't really achieve anything as far as like battling the cartels. Like, it doesn't hurt them that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think her approaches are well received. I mean, she's a highly popular president in Mexico right now.
I mean, hell, I want her to be my president,
No kidding.
Me
Yeah, no
too.
kidding.
A few great comments from the chat about that. Elizabeth, like who I said who lives in Mexico, said the only people I've heard here that don't love her are rich white Americans. And Cliff weighed in with Mexico elected both a woman and someone Jewish before we did. That's us. Like, yes.
Yeah.
To-
Yeah. And
yes to
it
all of that.
says something about, because machismo is such a big thing in Latin America,
Right.
right? And a lot of it's misogyny. But, they voted for a woman. Like they had
Yeah.
the machismo and the misogyny and all this, the anti-Semitism to fight through, and they did it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like that says a lot about us. And like we're not, everybody's like, we should analyze how Mamdani won, blah, blah, blah. You should analyze how Claudia Scheinbaum won. How
Yeah.
did they tackle the hate, the misogyny, all this stuff and still reach the people? And honestly, it was, if you want to be real general about it, it was a populist message, an
Right.
economic populist message.
It always is,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. Her
Right.
message was about lifting up the people, right? About investing in people and greater economic liberation for everybody. And surprise, surprise, people love that and they voted
Right.
for her.
And in
Right.
case I said this wrong, I can't tell from the chat. Rich white Mexicans have issues with her.
Yeah. When you said it, you said Americans, but
Oh, my
Elizabeth's quote was
apologies.
rich white Mexicans are the
We're rich white
only ones who-
Mexicans.
Yeah.
I just want to state that for the record. My apologies. That's the problem with starting a podcast at 7 a.m. every day. Sometimes the brain is not fully awake yet. Oh my gosh, we're almost at the top of the hour. I
I
feel
was
like
gonna say we need to ask Arturo our question. Arturo,
we
we
do.
ask the same question of everybody who comes on the show the first time they come visit us. And let me say, please, we would love to have you come back anytime. This has been probably one of the most
Absolutely.
educational hours I've spent in a long time.
Yes.
But Dana is going to ask you our big question that we ask everybody. I'm super curious because I think maybe you're not quite Gen X, but close to us, or maybe elder millennial. It looks like you're slightly
I'm
younger
Gen
than us.
X.
Okay,
No,
all
Are
right,
you?
all right. So
I'm
you're one of
51.
us.
Yeah, I have
All right,
grandkids,
you
man.
look good.
All
You
right.
look good. Here's the question then.
Thank
You're
you.
one of us. One of us. What is the most Gen X song of all time?
Oh man.
And it can be Spanish.
Uh
I love Spanish pop music, so feel free to
yeah, I don't know,
recommend music in either direction.
for me it's probably gonna be something from Public Enemy.
Nice.
You know what I mean? Because
Mhm.
I grew up in Union City, New Jersey. Havana on the Hudson is what they
Yeah.
called it because it's
Nice.
such a big Cuban population. But we were right across the river from the whole scene, and like
Mhm.
we got to hear Public Enemy and stuff like that on the local radio before they got national. And yeah, I don't
Fuck
know
yeah, that's
anything
awesome.
Public Enemy because it was protest
Yeah.
music. It's
Yeah.
revolutionary
Yeah.
music, and like I don't know, it speaks
Timeless.
to me.
Yeah.
When Chuck D followed me on Twitter, I was like
What?
about to do cartwheels, but I have some herniated discs. I shouldn't be doing cartwheels, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was over the moon when I saw that. I'm like, oh my God, one of my idols followed me on Twitter. No way. But
That is a
yeah,
huge
power to the
win.
people. I mean, Fear of a Black Planet was a great album.
Yes.
I couldn't pick one from Public Enemy, but I'm not gonna lie. I sit here when I work and I listen to Public Enemy, like their discography.
Nice.
Sometimes it could be Muddy Waters. My music listening is pretty broad, but yeah,
That's a
definitely
great one,
Public
though.
Enemy's Gen X. Yeah,
I-
because I mean they transformed rap at that time.
Yeah.
We went from Parents Just Don't Understand to Fight the Power,
Right.
and that was it for me. That's when rap and hip hop really started speaking to me. You had KRS-One, so many, Eric B. and Rakim, like, man, yeah. And believe I'm a big heavy metal fan, but there's a place in my heart for rap and hip hop. It really is. I got a huge discography of just stuff.
Oh
Nice.
my gosh. We say this a lot on the show. Like I'm a music nerd, different genres, but if we weren't living through this terrible timeline, we'd be here talking about bands and music and the
Yeah.
impact that they've made. So we
Yeah.
like to always have that touch point at the end of every show. I don't know a ton of Latin pop music, but growing up in South Florida, and I went back for a brief time in the 90s and lived there. I lived in Spain for a short while. So there were these like flashbulb moments of songs I know. Oh gosh,
Yeah,
add a little
one of
recommendations from you as well.
when it
Pop
comes
music with
to
hips. It's
yeah,
so good.
Spanish language music, for me, probably Buena Vista Social Club is one of my
Oh yeah.
favorites. They're
Okay.
Cuban.
Oh, they're so good.
Man, and that's kind of when it comes to cooking, it's always like old Cuban music or some Buena Vista Social Club, or because we cook a lot of almost every meal is some Cuban meal. And
Oh,
occasionally, some Jamaican stuff. My stepdad's Jamaican, so we could do a lot of jerk chicken, a lot of
Oh
really
my
spicy
God,
stuff.
yes.
So
I'm
yeah,
hungry now. I don't
Yeah,
right.
miss
We
yeah.
much
eat.
about South Florida, but the Cuban food, like
Yeah,
to be clear, where Lawrence and I grew up was like very suburban and it was like TGI Fridays.
yeah, yeah,
But as
yeah.
we got a little older and we could drive, there were a couple spots that I'm sure are long gone where we would go get
Oh yeah, we used to drive
Cuban
down to
food.
Miami and go to these Cuban diners just so that we could
Oh,
like
Yeah,
actually experience some flavor.
they're
yeah.
so good.
Funny you mentioned TGI Fridays. Y'all remember Steak and Ale?
Oh, for
Oh
sure,
my
for
God.
sure.
Yes.
I knew that would get you.
Bennigan's.
Steak and Ale.
Oh
That was
gosh.
good stuff. Good stuff.
Oh, for
Gen
sure.
X, being Gen X is fun, man.
Yeah.
It really is.
Arturo, this was so
Man,
great,
thank you
man. Thank
guys.
you so much for spending some time with us, and please come back in the future. You like,
Absolutely.
yeah, and thank
This was
you
fun.
for the
Yeah.
knowledge
Yeah,
you dropped
and
on us today.
sorry if I deviated from some of the stuff that I know I did from what I wanted
Not
to
at
talk
all.
about, but hey, I'm all for trying to, teach people about my culture and my people and Latin America in general. So
Yeah,
yeah, just when it comes to narratives from the US, don't believe the hype. Dig in,
Right.
look for something else because there's something they're not telling you.
yeah, always,
That's
always.
the perfect ending note. That and that Eric from the chat worked at Steak and Ale for 8 years.
Uh,
So keeping it real, Eric. I love
Yeah.
it.
that's
Oh my
funny.
gosh. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks to everyone in
You
the
too.
Cheers,
chat
everyone.
for adding your conversation to this broader discussion. We love having you here. Take care, everyone.
All right.
Love you, mean
Thanks,
it.
everybody. Love you, mean it.
Bye.
Bye. Mwah.
Bye.